Good morning, everyone. This is such an impressive turnout for so early in the morning, so thank you all for joining us. This morning's topic is Beyond Business. We're going to be talking about leadership and sustainability. I've got an amazing panel joining me who are scattered down this way and around, so I'll introduce everybody. We've got Clark Murphy with Russell Reynolds, Helle Jorgensen, who is the founder and CEO of Competent Boards, Samik Chatterjee, who is the Chief Strategy Officer at Petco Health and Wellness, and John Banner, who is the Executive Vice President and Global Chief Impact Officer of McDonald's Corporation. So welcome, thank you all so much. I really want this to feel collaborative and conversational, so please feel free. I'm gonna start off with a few questions, but everyone should feel free to chime in. The mics are a little funny. We can only have 4 on at a time. You hit the little button with the ear to talk. And please, I know everybody doesn't need a mic in this small room, but it's for recording purposes, so thank you. One quick reminder, and I always forget this conversation is on the record. Okay, so let's start. Why don't we just run down the row and have everybody start talking about what does impact leadership actually look like. And Clark, I'm glad we're starting with you because you actually wrote a book on sustainable leaders, so I think you're a perfect person to kick this off.
Well, there you go. So good morning and glad we're all here. Keep the coffee flowing. Not just because I'm talking, but no. And we were talking, similar themes to several of us, that a couple of years ago, I think we recognized, and we did a joint venture with the United Nations Global Compact, saying that progress wasn't being made sufficiently enough. Why was that? As governments may retreat, as they have, and the private sector needs to step up, that it was about leadership. And we have hundreds of incredibly successful, sustainable leaders around the world, but we need tens of thousands. And while capital and innovation, we think, can make great progress, you need leaders to push some of that. So we interviewed with UNGC a number of what we called pioneers, who were the most successful CEOs, from Mahindra Steel in India to OCBC Bank in Singapore to Heineken to Duke Energy, to see if those leaders, those CEOs, were actually different from the CEOs that we interview every day. And they were. And we were just talking about, the theme came up, and Kathleen's here somewhere, about systems thinking yesterday. And there were 4, I'll be very brief, there were 4 elements that when we tested and interviewed that spiked on these leaders. One was systems thinking, the ability, the conceptual thinking to deal with complexity. Long-term activation, that the greatest success of some of the things we're talking about, none of you will be in your jobs if you're really successful when the results come. And can you deal with that particularly in North America, a quarter-to-quarter mindset? Stakeholder inclusion, not inclusion DEI, but the greatest leaders create followership. They don't lead in a hierarchical way. And as someone said, if you aren't creating followership, then you're just taking a walk. So the social skills, not have cocktails last night, but you can test for sociability, that you come into a room or an offsite or a project and to pull the best from people, be decisive, and then take them forward, because we need ecosystems to move. And then disruptive innovation. When you believe you are creating something and you're wrong, can you step outside yourself to then commit to the innovation to do things? So we published this, it landed very well, and then we've now are doing a lot of CEO successions around the world. I would say more in Europe than in America. We could talk about that later. Where the boards have embedded these competencies in how they're going to pick the next CEOs over a 2 to 3 year period, and we're very active there. So the book was going back to another 45 CEOs around the world, from Natura in Brazil to Umicore in Belgium to BP, and saying, as a leader, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? What are your lessons learned for other leaders? And the takeaways. So I and we believe deeply, and Helle and I have talked about it, that identifying sooner and we all know the number of next gens that are so fired up to participate. Can you identify them, develop them, and retain them? Because I think there's, and I'll finish, there's a barbell of institutional investors saying this is what we think your company needs to do and how we're going to value your company. And the other end of the barbell is employees who will stay or go, and consumers who will buy or not. And the bar is bending. So with the leadership lens, can you develop them, can you expand them massively and retain them, and the best companies in the world will have them. Stop.
Well, to continue from what you're saying, Clark, I think leadership is about, and impact leadership is about, well, leadership, but exponential leadership. So as you're saying, this is not just about, taking a walk. This is actually about having someone that will follow you, and then the impact, having that positive impact. And I think you have, Paul Pullman, who's one of faculty members, once said, this world missing trees and leaders. And I think we're really missing those leaders that can step up and say, we want to make a difference, that we actually want to have that positive impact. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing when we do the programs is that we have, not only give that confidence in what it is we're talking about when we talk ESG and climate and DEI, et cetera, but we also have that consciousness, the ability to actually make informed decisions. And how can you make an informed decision if you're not informed? And I think that is one of the things that we're missing nowadays. We might have a lot of leaders, but are they leading us to where we want to go? And to talk about, the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals, the future we want, are they leading us to the future we want? And I think that's why we really need to have that impact leadership, but that positive impact leadership, where we go to where it is we want to go, and we follow those leaders that can actually do that. And we unfortunately probably have a little bit of deficit of those leaders. But I see all of you here, and you're all leaders, and you should all have that impact and go out and get that to others. And I think that's what I find so fascinating every time I hear from those going through the programs. It's like that impact that they can have, not only on their own organization, but other boards and others that they talk to. So, yeah.
I finally got this to work. Those are absolutely some brilliant points laid out. There are two things I may add to this that, taking a step back before I get to the two, impact leadership is leadership multiplied a couple of different times over. And COVID and the layering of ESG has just added to the complexity. But two things that I've seen that stand out. The first piece of it is conviction. A leader has to have conviction on what your values are and how you deliver results against your values, and sometimes trading off against your standard financial metrics. And leaders that successfully navigate that over the long haul become critical. And the second piece of it is focus and clarity. The reason at the end of the day, and we talked about how do you navigate different constituents. You have the investor community, and there are many different gradations of investors and different things they care about. You have your customers, you have your employees, and you have the community you participate in. How do you navigate and bring focus and priority and clarity on what are you going to do today, and what are you going to push out next year, and what are choices you make public that make a difference, and what are choices you will make within the walls of your company. So, example, Roe v. Wade, there were certain companies that stood out, there were certain companies that didn't say a word, there were certain companies that sort of elevated during the four walls. But making those choices on what's important and what's critical, and how do you drive that through the organization and through the community, and relay that back to your key constituents becomes a really important role as well.
Good morning. First of all, thanks for the previous comments. I would agree with all of them. I would just add, I think in some of our roles that we are in large, at-scale businesses which have to deliver in the short term but also have to invest massively in the long term. And I think it's sort of that end-to-end thinking that differentiates impact leadership from leadership, which is to say that you can't ignore the short term. To Clark's point, it enables you to keep your job and pay the people who work for you. But I think the difference, and I think we've seen this as trust has increased for business and decreased for governments in various parts of the world, is because not only were businesses willing to invest, but they were viewed as capable of investing and putting their money to good use. And you realize that a business, no matter what business you are, that it demands that you take certain actions to ensure your business is going to be around in the next 30 years. And I think that sort of long-term thinking is what enables transformation at scale, which is what I think we all care about making and contributes to the greater good, whether that's your workforce, whether that's your workforce to be, the people who you want to hire in the next 20 years, and whether that's the communities where you operate, or the customers that you serve. They all are expecting something, and over the long term, you have to deliver on those various demands and set some sort of leadership so that you have the ability to serve your customers, a generation from now. Otherwise, we're all, going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the future. We were discussing it yesterday with the circular economy and we have to make these changes in order for there actually to be customers and a workforce in the future. You all touched on this a little bit, but what are the kinds of credentials that you think that these new impact leaders really need to have? And soft skills are great, definitely, but are there more hard skills that you are seeing that feel necessary for these kinds of roles?
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I think it's shifted. So as you look at supply chains, as it relates to sustainability, and then the difficulty of supply chains between a pandemic and the Ukrainian war, the most successful sustainable leaders we've seen have worked in 2 continents, have had deep operational experience and finance, whereas I think you saw more marketing and communications before. As this role, we were just talking earlier that I believe a lot, and a lot of CSOs in this meeting for 2 days, that reporting to the chief executive officer with accountability. I was saying a client of ours was talking about that their ESG was going to be the head of HR, the CFO, and the general counsel, and it's not going to work, right? Nobody's in charge. They have full-time day jobs. So I think the closer to the operations, because of the influencing skills and accountability to get things done, and where it reports, and the breadth of their influence and understanding of the company or the industry is defining that role all the time. Just my opinion.
I guess when the pandemic hit, I went out and said, cash is king, but care is queen. So if we don't care about our suppliers, if we don't care about our employees, if we don't care about all of our stakeholders, how should they care about us? But of course, if we don't able to kind of like manage our cash flow, we can't care about them because we don't have the money to actually do that. So having that kind of like both that care, but also make sure that you have the cash. And it goes back to making the long-term decisions. Michael Tresco, who used to be the chair of Unilever, once said to me, well, Helle, it's so good you say all of that we need to do all of these long-term things. But the only way we can do all the right long-term things is because we do all the short-term right decisions. So, and that's perhaps where I see now we're really, really good at putting those long-term goals and wishful thinking, and someone will call it not greenwashing, but green wishing. But if we're not able to set those goals for every single day, I think that's where we're going to fall down, and that trust that people have in leaders will disappear. The other thing I actually think we need to get to is being human beings. Human beings in the boardrooms, human beings in the C-suite, and it goes back to that care. And I have some of those that go through the programs come back and say, this made me think like a human being. And I'm like, okay. And then you start thinking about it, right? If you're in a boardroom situation, if you're in a leadership situation, if you're in a situation where you need to take these decisions, bam, 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 what do you look at? You look at the financials. Do you really think about that supplier that can't pay their people because we say, well, we can't really pay that right now? Do we really think about the consequences of our employees in a given situation? So I think that starting to almost put ourselves in the shoes of our stakeholders will make it so much easier for us to actually act as human beings, which should not be something we should get taught, but I think that we need. So over to you.
Back to, I think, the topic on hard skills. The one thing that I've seen that is working, and the answer sounds a lot easier than it is in real life, is treating ESG like a business and taking on sort of a general management hat. Because at the end of the day, the ability to look at, what's your budget? How do you go execute? What do you prioritize? What's your plan to go, make sure the rest of the organization is supportive, has helped in some ways. And we have work to do at Petco, but the ability to pick and say, here's the plan, here's the budget, here's the resources, here's how we execute, here's how we measure, and here's how we reward, much more so than, similar to a general business with the general manager running it, has helped. There are some ways it doesn't, because at the end of the day, a general manager has revenue, margin, some measure of profitability, whereas the metrics are different out here. But the more we tie back to how do you go deliver KPIs and results you sign up for across the organization become important. So finance, executional skills, marketing, particularly the ability to hear back what your audiences are saying and refine what you're doing and improve the precision of what you're doing. All of those and others become pretty critical. And again, understanding of the supply chain, understanding of who your vendor community is, who your customers are, and how do you navigate those become absolutely critical.
I guess I would just build on that point, which I think is exactly right. You can't, you have to be a business leader to be able to lead an impact. And I think, the old days of, CSR is off to the side are long over. And I think being able to lead from within to not only set global targets, but then how do those roll up into markets, and how do you actually land those targets in a specific geography or a specific business? And I think the skill sets of listening is really important, and spending time not just doing a show to visit your employees in different parts of the world, but really spending time with them to understand what their needs are, immersion with your customers to understand what their needs are. So leading with empathy, I think, is probably one of the most important aspects of impact leadership, of a capability, which, a friend of mine used to say, you can't teach judgment. And I think that's probably right, but I think you can teach empathy. And I think that leaders have to be able to understand where somebody's coming from, because unless you understand that, you're not going to be able to point the organization in the right direction. And I think that's, so I would say, and the other thing I would probably say is that you have to be committed to transparency, and you really can't advocate for change unless you're willing to sort of be honest about what you're doing and the progress you're making.
I couldn't agree more on the listening skills, that of all these people we've interviewed so successful around sustainability in any culture in the world, like they're aggressive listeners. And I know that sounds trite, but I think one of the issues of senior leaders and then the next generations believing something's actually happening is where it's not happening, is there hasn't been really good listening, whether it's any of the stakeholders, So I 1,000% agree. I think the empathy gene, a lot of people figured out in the pandemic, and that's kind of a new concept. But the listening, that you're actually going deep, whether it's your supplier or your employee base or your shareholders, couldn't agree more.
And it was just fascinating. This was actually before the pandemic. We went out and did a survey where we asked faculty and alumni and others in terms of what should the future leaders look like. And came back with a lot of things. And we kind of like said, okay, let's put this together. So we put it together saying, well, you need to have a brain, right? You need to be able to do that. But you also need to have a heart. And then the last, you need to have hands to actually act and actually do it. And I think we need to have, all of those different things. We can have the empathy, we can sit and listen, but you also need to have that leadership skills in saying, okay, there are some dilemmas here. How am I going to deal with this? And how do I communicate that back to people so that they actually say, yeah, okay, I get it. That's the right way forward. So, yeah. Sorry.
No, that's wonderful. And I love that you can't teach judgment, but it's a relief to hear that you can teach empathy. I'm curious, there's a lot of other leaders in the room. If there's any skill sets that you feel like we haven't touched on that you might want to mention, or any questions you might have for the panelists? Yeah.
I had a quick question. There we go. I think it was Peter yesterday said that mounting inequality is a greater threat to economic stability than climate. I hope I didn't misquote him. And we hear a lot about divisiveness and polarization. And I guess the question I have is, what is the role of business in that conversation? And how do we assess and develop those skills in board directors, CEOs? By the way, I don't have the answer. So it's an honest question. And if somebody's thought about that and has a concrete answer, that's awesome. Yeah.
We actually today launched the Future Boardroom. So where we are inviting everyone, so everyone here who have ideas on terms of what should that future boardroom look like. And you're so right. I think one of the things I hear often now is like, oh, we need to put E here, S here, G here. I'm like, well, these things are interrelated. So the consequences of what we do right now is saying, okay, we bring our supply chains back, right? I can see a lot of good things of that. But there's also some consequences. You're going to have people around the world that do not have what they have now. So when Peter starts talking about that, it's kind of like, think about climate refugees, you also economic refugees. Right now have a lot of people coming out of Ukraine that unfortunately is part of modern slavery. So you have a lot of different things that kind of like goes beyond some of these things we need to, and unless you have that mindset and start thinking about all of that interrelated, I think we're going to make some wrong decisions. I don't know if there's a wrong decision in a boardroom, but we are going to make some uninformed decisions is probably the better way of saying it. And at the end of the day, in a world where fiduciary duty is kind of like, we still have the fiduciary duty, but what people are saying and saying, hey, where were the board in this? That's changing. So we're starting the future boardroom, basically to bring in all of this. I'm a little bit afraid that we're going to see the great resignation in boardrooms, or maybe I'm looking forward to it because it depends on who it is that resign. But I think we need to start saying, what should that future boardroom look like? And who should be around that boardroom table, including youth. Sorry, talk to me afterwards, I'm getting.
I guess I would add that I think it's a good question because I think it's part and parcel of the responsibility that we have to our workforce and that we have the communities. I mean, in businesses that are spread out throughout the world, if the communities where the businesses are existing aren't thriving, the business won't thrive. And even when you look at inside McDonald's, for instance, some years ago decided we're 90-something% franchised, so we have thousands of small men and women owning our restaurants around the world. But we collaborated with them to create an Archways to Opportunity. We have 2.2 million people in the McDonald's system who work for McDonald's around the world. And the Archways to Opportunity is co-funded by our franchisee owners and McDonald's, and it allows them to get English as a second language education. It allows them to get an associate's degree at community college. It affords them the ability to learn and expand their thinking while they're working, and then obviously go on to either a managing position in the company or go into another job. In fact, there's one estimate I read, and I'm only 3 months in, so don't quote me, but 1 in 8 Americans has worked at McDonald's at some point. And so the scale of that investment of first jobs and skill sets is pretty remarkable. And I think that extends to the communities where we operate. All the owners and operators are investing in training and other things for their workers. So I think there is a responsibility that business has to advance and to tackle inequality by first looking inside and then looking in the communities.
I want to quickly comment on 2 things. One, I run a social impact communications strategy firm, Susan McPherson, and the best hire I've made in the last 4 years went through McDonald's training. So exactly what he's saying. But I want to address what Jeremy said, because, we can't take these, and I'm not assuming you were doing this, climate here, inequality here, civic, breakdown here, because they're all really connected. And as the climate deteriorates and we see climate issues, that's going to cause more civil anxiety and unrest, et cetera. So I just would encourage us to think of these things together as opposed to, and I also want to flag, Fortune had an amazing article written by Ellen McGirt yesterday about rising anti-Semitism and what, just another thing to add to our plates, right? But it's all connected.
I just wanted to, hi everyone, Martin Whitaker from Just Capital. There's a month-long, almost years-long effort at the WBCSD, the Business Commission on Tackling Inequality. So I just wanted to refer you to that. There's lots of company leaders, in fact, people in this room may well be part of it. And I think we're about to issue a very substantial summary of all the learnings over the last 12 months. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
I was just going to build on the comments about inequality, and you asked about role of business. I agree with you, John. I think every business has multiple ways to address inequality. So one is certainly workforce. And each of us, depending on the industry we're in and the nature of our workforce, may have different opportunities to address that. But for businesses like McDonald's, or I'm at Walmart, we have these large-scale entry-level workforces largely. And so we can play a significant role taking down barriers to work, and then, as you pointed out, on-the-job training and education and connections to career paths for advancement, and making that a priority and measuring that and investing in it. We have similar institutions like Walmart Academy and Live Better You, free education, 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, but they're degrees that are connected to things relevant for our business. So retail management, supply chain management, pharmacy tech, coding, for our tech aspects of our business. So that's a big one. And then the other one is suppliers. You talked about suppliers, and do we think? Yes, we think about it all the time. We're cultivating our supplier communities and making sure they're resilient and helping them weather, challenges like the pandemic and so on. And businesses can be a force to unlock entire sectors, depending on what type of supply chain you have and the volumes you're sourcing. But, manufacturing in the United States, or we do a lot of work because we're largely a food business, engaging smallholder farmers in India and Mexico. These are significant programs where we're trying to develop the agricultural sector locally through sourcing and philanthropy, and that's a big one in terms of elevating communities and addressing income. So those are a couple of different things. And then inequality or advancing equity as a lens in all the different aspects of business, including customer proposition. So what are the ways as we all of us serve our customers? Are there sources of inequity even in that, and can you dismantle that? So in our case, it would be around pricing or access, things like that.
So if I can just build on the conversation around boards, Jeanette Ferrana-Storga, I'm with Zoetis. You know, if we could do a double click, I'd love to get your perspective on what are the profiles you're seeing of directors that are successfully advocating and advancing sustainability strategy at the board level. I mean, I think as sustainability officers, we spend increasingly more time with our directors, and as we think about that, you know, view into the long term, you know, specifically with the research you've done, you know, what does that look like in the next several years in terms of an optimal profile and advocate?
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise you, it's changing both in demographic and experience. And so, and I don't think any of us would believe in single-purpose directors, you know, around digital or cyber or sustainability. But it's been businesses that have typically been through transformation in terms of agribusiness, circularity, et cetera, that the demand, and again, I would say it came heavily 2 or 3 years ago in the continent, more recently in the UK, and now probably in the middle part of America, if you will, literally, and Canada, where it's not just that they're younger or a different generation, but their operational experiences are very different as opposed to what do they want? They always wanted a CEO in seat or recently retired, then increasingly a CFO if you have spikes in the economy. This is now about deep operational transformation, and particularly around resourcing uses of power and water and process change. And I would say the demand is quite high. The trade-off is those are first-time directors. I'm a big proponent of first-time directors. I think they're better prepared. I think they listen better. They stay quieter longer instead of wanting to hear their own voice. And they've read everything because they want to succeed. They don't want to fail, right, and look stupid. And not every board, let's call it the Fortune 250, is comfortable with first-time directors. And that's part of breaking the paradigm, and I'm a huge believer. So I think it's greater operations, transformation, lots around the impact of food, agribusiness, resourcing, et cetera. We would say that, and I'd say that's well on its way in the continent in Europe and happening in North America. And your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree.
You don't have to.
No, I know, and you can hear I'm not fully. So I think there's two ways of looking at this. So there's kind of like if you look at Europe, well, you can see it from a gender equality point of view. Now you start saying 40%, et cetera. So you can kind of like look at it from the number perspective. You can also look at it from the competences perspective, and that like Susan, like both you and I are saying, kind of like how do we ensure that we have the right mindset and think interrelated on all of these different matters. I think there's a survey that just came out that showed of the 100 largest corporations in the world, I think it's now, a little bit more than 40% of those board directors serving at a committee overseeing sustainability, ESG, climate change, whatever we want to call it. So they have that it's on their shoulder, they have to do it, but that actually are conscious about this. Last year, 8% of them had a kind of education. This year, it's 5%. First time, and full transparency, I'm an advisor to that organization, but first time I looked at it, I looked at the numbers, and all the numbers were going up. More people that knew about sustainability that were serving on the committees, et cetera. More committees, a lot of sustainability committees out there. And then I started looking at the numbers, and I'm an accountant by training. So I was like, there's not enough directors that actually know, are conscious about this, to fill all of those sustainability committees. So I think we need to see, and including having some CSOs, Michael Kobori from Starbucks now serve at a board. I think we're going to see more CSOs, Chief Sustainability Officers, that will, and I hope someone here will help make that happen. So we actually get that, because I think there's a lot of Chief Sustainability Officers that have that interrelated thinking. We just need to make sure that they also understand to speak board language, and they also understand finance.
I'm just going to add to some of the great comments that's made. And by the way, that's a really deep and powerful question. I've reached out to my network and said, how does your board think of ESG? And we've been fairly new in navigating ESG at Petco. And one of the key themes that has come out is if your board member is deep in a particular topic, whether it be marketing or digital, ESG has to be integrated in the way they think versus a bolt-on. And the successful board members that separate out think of ESG built into the function versus we've done what it takes to drive that function and it'll help you drive some thinking and decision and hey, let's check some boxes. And I think that's what separates, from my understanding and what I'm seeing, the difference between members that make a difference versus members that look at ESG as an afterthought. And it's a complex world. But at least thinking of it holistically in terms of how do you drive digital. One of the interesting debates we've had is our digital business, you're delivering a box to a customer. And that usually has historically involved a UPS or a USPS or a FedEx shipment that is not carbon friendly as much as someone coming to our stores and picking it up. And so having some of our board members help us think through that, how do you lower your footprint to enable that last mile delivery through something that's pretty distinctive. So we use our stores as the final mile and then a DoorDash or an Uber partnership to get our products to our customers through our digital orders. But our board members helping think through that was pretty critical, which is customers wanted a certain way. You guys are approaching it in sort of a more traditional way of how it's served. How do you think about something disruptive? And I think that's been really powerful for us to navigate through.
Kwesi Mitchell from Deloitte. I'd like to go back to the discussion on hard skills, and particularly, I've heard a lot when you think about, particularly all of us, thinking about our successors or building future leaders. And the trends that I'm hearing is like business leaders, people who've driven transformation, right? People who can understand broader system thinking, speak in the language of the board. That doesn't necessarily speak, in my mind, to our successors being specialists in sustainability, D&I, governance, CSR. So as we think about the teams that we're building and the successors that we make, are they pulling leaders from our business and teaching them the nuances of so many different aspects of ESG in comparison to an ESG expert who perhaps hasn't had the exposure with respect to driving business transformation?
I would just maybe take a first crack at that. I think the shift is happening, I would say, across the board in any of these specialties where we need to make progress, where you used to set, okay, let's have sustainability office over here while you have a supply chain office over here. And I think the reality going forward is that unless you have your supply chain people understand sustainability, you're not going to make progress. So you can't separate the two. And I think it's true with DE&I and the importance of driving sort of awareness and progress across internal and external goals to embed DE&I capabilities in different functions and businesses. So you're not going to have, I think, you saw, I don't know, another publication, not to be named, also based in New York, did a whole story about how business school education is finally changing, right? Like what took so long. The reality is sustainability and the importance of community has been around for a generation and they're just now changing. It shows the reality that business leaders who have MBAs are going to have to lead on DE&I and ESG, and that's part of the remit of the job. That's a hard skill that you're either going to learn on the job or maybe you have some familiarity coming in. But gone are the days where that specialist is going to lead for the entire organization, because it's not going to make the progress. They have to be embedded. So I think it is a change. I think it's still evolving. It's probably not all the way there yet, but I think that's where it's going to go, which is progress has to be made embedded in the business, not sort of this function set up aside.
And just to add to that, John, E, S, and G, it's a pretty complicated term. At the end of the day, you have cybersecurity with how do you drive inclusion. But if you sort of fast forward in time when we have a lot of, hopefully, more clarity around what that means and how do you prioritize, that should be critical leadership skills just as much as integrity and driving transformation. And that's a journey I think we will take.
And if I may, totally agree. But this is part of the DNA. I mean, the problem is that we haven't been taught this in school, but those that goes to school now, they are actually teaching it. If you talk to your kids, they understand some of these aspects better than some board members do. But you know, so it should not be in that office, as you're saying. So if you think about it from Deloitte, and I love the sustainability departments at Deloitte and everywhere else, but in reality, it should be the auditors. In reality, it should be the strategy people. In reality, it should be the tax people. In reality, it should be all of those different functions that when they go out and advise and do their audits, they understand these aspects. So it's not like two different teams that needs to be sent in. I don't know if you do that, but you know, I used to be a partner at PwC. So I might be kind of like putting things over there. But I think that's important to say that this is embedded. So long time back, I've worked for IKEA in terms of their supply chain and put together this I-Way, which is how they go out to their code of conduct. And IKEA, I think, was the first that said, we don't want to only go out and say, here's a code of conduct, dear suppliers, please make sure you comply with it. They actually went out and trained, and so I was sent out all over the world to train their suppliers. But not only the suppliers, also procurement. Because what happens is that if procurement comes out one day with us saying, we don't, well, it's good you signed my code of conduct, but if you haven't, you know, can't deliver in this and you don't that price, etc. So there's these two kind of like goes against, while if procurement is trained, so it's not sustainability team coming out and saying, please sign my code of conduct, and then procurement team comes out and say, I'm not going to buy from you unless you're actually not compliant with your code of conduct. So you need to have it embedded into all these different functions. It goes with sales, it goes with R&D, it goes with finance, it goes with all of these different aspects of the company.
I want to switch back to a comment that Alan made. Jonathan Reckford with Habitat for Humanity, and I spent the first half of my career in large multinationals, and my experience was they all had balanced scorecards. They're all actually great companies. In down cycles, the balanced scorecard got very unbalanced because if financial results weren't there, everything else suddenly got cut. What would be different this time, or is it going to be any different this time as we potentially are looking at a pretty tough economic climate in the next year or 2 years?
I think that question comes up all the time in the last 6 months, because we had 3 years of let's go solve all the world's problems and we love it and we can pay for it. I think the answer won't surprise you. The committed companies are so far into this that they're creating revenue and creating more efficiency through many of the projects we've all just talked about. And I would love to hear from Kathleen and from John, given its scale. But so number one. The other is you've seen, whether it's circularity or other components of where they've created revenue through trying to solve some of these issues. Number two, I think we probably, and I would speak for myself as a former CEO, cutting costs in a tough time, that we knew we had the answers at the top of the company, when many of the solutions are farther down in the company in creative thinking. And so I think the best companies will stay the course, back to the long and the short term that you talked about. And I think the ones who are talking BS will be cutting back ESG, and they'll be firing people and all of that. So, you know, I think it'll speak for itself, but there's so many companies creating revenue and profits out of authenticity in the long term. They're going to win over the next 36 months. John?
Yeah, I would just say, I think, you know, if we look back to the pandemic and sort of what happened there, I think we learned some lessons about what happens when certain sectors of the economy take their eye off the ball, and you look at sort of the challenges that the Russian invasion had in supply chains and all the like. And I think you would say that it's more important than ever to build resilience into supply chains. That includes continue to advance your goals around that you've made. So I think there's a reality that we can't afford to repeat some of the mistakes that may have been made that led to some of these things in the last several years. But also, I think that you, you know, if you're a business at scale, you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And you have to be able to continue to, you know, push forward on the commitments that you made, and figure out how you're going to manage through a potential downturn. I mean, that's the reality of a business. And I think, you know, that's where it gets back to the first question about leadership.
So I think we are probably in a situation where if you don't have the board of directors, unfortunately, the tenure of CEOs are getting shorter and shorter. So if you don't have board of directors that really fully are on board and understand it, there is a risk that they're going to say, you know, let's cut that, because that's a cost. If they don't understand that it's actually innovation. The reason why I started competent boards was actually all of these projects I saw different places. We left money on the table, we left innovation on the table, we left, well, sometimes, you know, livelihoods and sometimes lives on the table, because we were just making decisions that when things got tough, it's like, oh, you know, we can do that. It was pet project. And I actually, back when I said to Michael Tresco, the chair of Unilever, saying, what's going to happen when Paul Pullman is no longer here? Because what's often happens is that you get a new CEO in, and the new CEO say, I don't like the old CEO's strategy, so let me do something different. So unless you get it embedded into what we talked about before, to everything, unless you actually have a board of directors that are the stewards of the future, to just say what, you know, that really understand these matters and ensure that they are choosing the right CEO, that understand that they are actually, this is part of it, that have the balanced scorecard that's balanced, you know. But there's one thing, and that is all of the disclosure regulations that's coming up right now. So I don't think there's any stepping back, because you are going to be one way or another. If it's not leadership, it's compliance. And I think there will be a lot that will go for the compliance, but I'm hoping for the leadership.
I mean, those are some really powerful. I'll probably add to that point, saying exactly, I think, John, what you mentioned is you've had, taking a step back, you've had companies that have gone through hard times, that have cut back on marketing, cut back on taking care of people, and they pay the price. They pay the price over the long term. So having the resilience and the focus on all of ESG topics to continue on the long term becomes very much important to continue making the progress. The second really simple thing is a lot of these initiatives are multi-year initiatives. It's hard to break. You could slow down a little bit, you could move the dials, but it's hard to put the brakes. It's hard to really unravel a lot of the work that's happening, particularly with suppliers, with your people. So you've got to focus on what is it you do over the long haul while optimizing for what you need to do in the short term. Tactically, you might choose to move out CapEx for a project or something that you're doing on sustainability, but you've got to keep the focus on the long haul.
So many great questions. Thank you all. I'm curious, are there CEOs or executives out there that really epitomize these leadership skills?
I mean, you know they are, right? Yeah. So I think if
I know who they aren't.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think you, and it doesn't have to be the largest companies in the world either. We haven't talked about startups, but I was thinking this morning, and I was in our rooms at the St. Regis, and your little tubes of shampoo and conditioner, none of which are recyclable. And there's a company called Hair Story, you've never heard of. It's in the West Village in New York City, and they have probably some of the worst chemicals in the world are not gasoline and oil, they're shampoo and conditioner because of the nature of the FDA. And most of those big plastic ones, all these women with long, beautiful hair, none of those plastic containers are recyclable. So I also think there are great companies that are startups, not just some of the biggest companies in the world. But if you look at whether it's Duke Energy and overcoming some huge issues, Lynn Good is the CFO, Dolph, who runs Heineken, has done amazing things around water, the CEO of Sanofi, Patrick, these are companies that have done amazing things. Casper Orsted lost his job at Adidas a month ago, but he did amazing things around recycled products for performance sneakers. His problem was he couldn't sell in China. It's the biggest market in the world for sneakers, and some other things you've all read about recently. So I think there are a tremendous number of chief executives, but if we only focus, I think it comes back to this last question about endurance and resilience. It's about embedding these hard skills, okay, about long-term and innovation, but also embedding that they can be long-term. Sustainable leaders need to be sustainable, right? Not just, so I think there's a whole mindset around that, and I think there's moments of reflection when nobody has time. You step back and say, okay, we're going to cut costs, we're going to have a tough period, maybe tougher in Europe than America, we'll see. But do we have our eye on the ball long term? That the ability of great leaders to pull people out for a while, a day or 2 days or whatever it takes. So I think there are innumerable great leaders, but also point out the ones that are 3 levels down that are great leaders.
Go ahead.
Well, I think there are more and more great leaders out there. But there's one that came to mind when the question was actually one that's no longer with us, Ray Anderson from Interface. And I think he was probably the one that really started saying, let me think about what is it actually we do. And he said at some point, leaders like me will go to jail in the future. So he started to understand that, because we're plundering the earth, et cetera, et cetera. So that, again, mindset and saying what it is, and I think that's what we're going to see in some of these current and future leaders, that they understand that both the long and the short term.
I think we touched on it a little bit, but you're talking about those leaders that are a few tiers down from the CEO. Giving them exposure to both the sustainability side of things and the business side of things. How are companies championing them? Are there, I feel like there's 1,000 different women's leadership programs which have their merits and don't have their merits. But I'm wondering, more specifically around sustainability, are there training programs that companies are offering that could be helping to identify and lift up these leaders?
Hog the mic. I think one of the things that it all is related, mobility we talked about before, about developing the hard skills so I think increased mobility, whether it's around diversity in terms of what we do, but also we all need shared experiences, and the concept of growing up only in the finance function or being the head of marketing or be the ops person, and then do you make it to the executive committee or the SLT or whatever. So I think that's super important around developing next leaders. And we have a super American audience here these 2 days. And the discussions are, it was interesting to hear Peter yesterday. I think we need to open the aperture. You got a lot of global companies here. And Kathleen, I really enjoyed, we've never met, but I enjoyed what you were talking about yesterday, bringing a global perspective. And we were talking earlier about, I think, the vocational training and the upskilling. I think the biggest social, I don't want to talk too much, the social potential upheaval, our obligation is upskilling and training. You look at what France and Germany do around vocational training and associate's degrees, equivalence, that just supports this concept around society creating jobs. Work is dignity, as someone once said. So I think mobility is important, exposure is important, getting out of either you're part of the country in America or getting out of America is very important if it's in a global business, and understanding the institutional investor, which is not a typical part of leadership development historically. The pressures of institutional investors, good or bad, okay, red state or blue state investor, is going to impact your career. And I think that concept of greater exposure is very important.
And yesterday, some of us were at the Martin Luther King, and they had the training from 1 to 12, And I think that's perhaps one of those important things. We and many of us was there and had tears. I had tears in my eyes, and some of the things did there. Clearly selfless. A plug here from competent boards where we are training, and I have a few of those people that have been going through the programs, and I hope what we're doing there is training both to understand cybersecurity, responsible use of data, tax, investment, pay, the ESG, the climate, the DEI, the human rights, all of those different aspects we need to have, and have that holistic mindset on all of that. So at least that's what I hope our impact is.
I would just add, I mean, I think there's a number of training programs on inclusive leadership and others that many companies use. And I think that it's in addition to the trainings that are available, some of which are mandated across various enterprises, is the sort of cross-training that happens within a company, so that I know at least in my function, which spans government relations to sort of philanthropy, that trying to get people different skill sets and be able to learn on the job, you know, at a staff level is important to their future growth trajectory, not only at McDonald's, but wherever they go. And so how do we cross-train and build capability models for future leaders that enable their success and growth?
Just to add to that, one powerful tailwind we have in the land of ENS, may not be in G, is certainly the next generation. When you look at millennials and Gen Zs, they care much more about both of those topics. They quite haven't figured out what G stands for, and data. They care about data privacy, but the governance piece of it, and that's a tailwind that is really going to benefit everything, whether it be the employee base and how do you get them in early in their careers and nurture what they want to do and give them a platform, as well as customers that are making choices with E and S at the forefront of it. And also both of these customer segments spend more on their pets as a percentage of the disposable income. We don't get that. But the choices they make is pretty powerful to look at. And it's going to be a tailwind for us in the land of ESG. Oh yeah, we're deep partners. We're connected. Love the company. The phenomenal partners.
Perhaps just one thing to add, and you kind of said it, in terms of we also need to start understanding a little bit more about what's going on in the rest of the world. And having that, I think you said that you need to have leaders that at least have worked in two different parts of the world. One of the things we're trying to do is actually bring in that insight from those leaders from all over the world and share what it is that they're thinking in Hong Kong, in Australia, in India, in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, etc., so that people can actually sit, in their chair, not use carbon, to fly out, but actually get all of that insight of what's happening around the world. And I find that especially fascinating. We had a session where we were talking about geopolitical issues and all of these things that hitting the boardroom and hitting the C-suite and business professionals. And it was Nick Gowing who have started thinking the unthinkable, and he was like talking about all of these different things. And then I had one board director on from Nigeria that says, well, yeah, you're talking about war. Yes, you're talking about inflation. Yes, you're talking about all of this. We have that all the time. So that resiliency that we perhaps have from other people, and start understanding that, and by the way, there was also a director from Latin America and say, yeah, I mean, this is perhaps what we have been dealing with for a long, long time. So I think that understanding that global insight here is important for us all. We can only learn from it.
I think that's a really great note to end on. Thank you all so much. This hour just flew by. I think we had so many great insights. Thank you all for your great questions. Just a reminder that the main stage session today starts in 10 minutes. So see you all down there. Thank you all so much. Thank you again to the panelists.